Section B, the formation of living matter. Quote, the wholeness of an organism is self-integrating in active realization. Its form is not the result, but the cause of the dynamic arrangements of matter, and hence the process at the same time is the form. End quote. That's Hans Jonas. Whitehead contends that, quote, it belongs to the essence of all occasions of experience that they are concerned with an otherness transcending themselves. As Hosinski says with this contention, it implies that, quote, subjectivity is derivative from objectivity. In other words, the objective world as given to us through our prehension of the past is the soil from which subjective enjoyment sprouts. Similarly, Varela says of organisms that, quote, because there is an individuality that finds itself produced by itself, it is ipso facto a locus of sensation and agency. A living impulse always already in relation with its world, end quote. This relation is one of concern. As Whitehead says, quote, the occasion as subject has concern for the object, and the concern at once places the object as a component in the experience of the subject, with an affective tone drawn from this object and directed towards it. Varela agrees, stating that, quote, there cannot be an individuality which is isolated and folded into itself, end quote. Instead, organisms have, quote, a precarious existence, always menaced by concern, the need to avoid perishing, and to do this it is again dependent on matter, whose characteristics are the reason for its concern. The avoidance of perishing referred to by Varela is a result of every organism's relationship with matter, which mechanistic science tells us inevitably tends towards disorder. But as Whitehead reminds us, the notion of dead matter is an abstraction from the full complexity of concrete actuality. Life is defined by its continual self-production, maintaining its form by remaining far from thermodynamic equilibrium on a wave of negative entropy. As Varela says, this entails that teleology is a primordial tendency of matter manifest in the form of organisms. The attempt to avoid perishing will not ultimately succeed, but through attempting to achieve it moment by moment, the organism experiences its subjective form, quote, enjoying its decisive moment of absolute self-attainment as emotional unity, end quote, and thereby establishes itself as an object to be prehended by its next occasion of experience. To account for the natural purposes inherent in living forms, both Varela and Whitehead are forced to reject the materialist doctrine that defines matter as inert and passive. As Varela puts it, quote, the emergent causality of the reciprocal passages between the local elements, the physical pole, and the global emergent identity, the mental pole, are not a caprice, but inscribed and endogenous to nature itself, a tendency rather than an irregularity. And Whitehead, quote, what has vanished from the field of ultimate scientific conceptions is the notion of vacuous material existence with passive endurance, with primary individual attributes and with accidental adventures. This concept is useless as an ultimate notion in science and in cosmology. A materialist may here protest that we have run roughshod over the established empirical facts concerning objective nature. But from Whitehead's perspective, the dualism between subject and object established by Descartes is in conflict with the organic realism he sought to establish. Descartes' dualism led to the uneasy doctrine of primary and secondary qualities. A dualism Whitehead rejects by pointing out that, quote, what Descartes described as primary attributes of physical bodies are really the forms of internal relationships between actual occasions and within actual occasions, end quote, from Process and Reality. For Whitehead, primary qualities which are supposed by the materialist doctrine to be the final real things existing independently of subjective experience are but abstractions, for, quote, we can never survey the actual world except from the standpoint of an immediate concrescence. Actuality means nothing else than this ultimate entry into the concrete. an abstraction from which there is a mere non-entity. End quote. This brings us to a further parallel between Varela's theory of autopoiesis and Whitehead's process of concrescence. Concrescence can be defined in a simplified way as the real internal constitution of a particular existent, end quote. More technically, a concrescence is, quote, the name for the process in which the universe of many things acquires an individual unity in a determinate relegation of each item of the many to its subordination in the constitution of the novel one, end quote. That's Whitehead from Processing Reality. I got a call, so I'll stop it here and pick up with the part 8.